For POI, please say it through chat. I'm trying my best to still checking on the chat box. And yeah, please deliver it mindfully and with equity. I mean, okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Our stance is pretty simple. First, we prefer alternative of state-funded space race such as NASA or Sputnik satellite launch that was made by Russian space station, for example. Second of all, we prefer like space race that are using taxpayers' money instead of the profit that is garnered by millionaires and profit funneled from their branch corporations. Third of all, we still allow these billionaires probably to invest on NASA, for example, but we're not going to allow them to have majority of the stakes, for example, because we don't want them to dictate how should we use the knowledge that we have found, how should they use the research that was recently found, and how should we use our like space travel and for what purpose it is. Our burden is to prove that capitalist tycoons provide more harm than good, and the rise means that capitalist tycoons like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are dominating this race and actually catch much more attention to the public rather than NASA and also like other state-funded space race, for example. In terms of firstly about the funding, that means these capitalist tycoons fund like maybe 80 to 90% of the whole administration and also the whole process of this space race. Second of all, talking about the discourse, how people glorify this Elon Musk and also Jeff Bezos for being the first billionaires of the earth, or like being the first non-astronauts that land themselves to the moon or to other planets, how they use their whole money and how prestigious their trips were, right? We think that these overall things are inherently harmful. So what am I going to talk about in this page? First, I'm going to talk about why this race creates more harm when it's specifically done by millionaires. Second of all, why it's going to be principally bad for scientific knowledge. And lastly, why it's perfectly fine if we have to deal with the worst case scenario of delay of sports race. Okay, so firstly, why this race creates more harm when it's specifically done by millionaires? First reason is because they're profit oriented, for sure. That means they will make a pattern out of it if this technology or this race becomes successful. That means this creates less accessibility for middle class and developing states who need to transfer themselves to other planets. Notice that this transfer of planets becomes like the promise for us to repair the damage of climate change because Earth becomes much more inhabitable and so on. That means it's urgent for this technology to be as accessible as possible. And the moment that these billionaires are having no intention whatsoever to make it accessible, therefore the harm is going to be inherent. That means because patent increase price and disallow competitors to enter. Because when you have a patent out of a technology, you probably enjoy to be the only monopolizer or the only companies that produce this particular technology for like 10 to 50 years, for example, because especially when the patent is given for a really new technology that can save the whole human species, that means you can get the biggest length of patent. That means first, there will be no cheaper alternative. Second of all, there will be no innovation because when you are the one that monopolize the whole market, that means you will settle for it because there's no competitor that will foster you to innovate because there's no competition, right? This means this also disproves OO's potential argument about faster progress because of like the intent, like the motive of profit seeking and so on. Exactly, this make the billionaires settles for less and not being able to compete. But second of all, most likely the targets are only fellow millionaire or people with who are not like middle class, right? Because space travel is going to be packaged as a luxurious vacation instead of for human survival, because it's made to earn as much profit as possible. So most likely the main target or the main market of these particular technologies are celebrities or rich people who want to buy some land in the moon, wants to build some houses in Mars, for example. That's why there's no intention to decrease price and make it much more accessible in any near future, while the harm of climate change is very much instant, right? Probably in 10 or 20 years, we will not survive of the flood and also the melting ice of like South Pole and so on. That means probably like if you want to save people, the first one that's going to be saved are like these super rich people. Third of all, even if it's made for human survival, let's say like the narrative that these millionaires portray are like they want to save human being. This creates a billionaire saver narrative that makes them free from any check and balance, criticism, and also taxation. That means the new world or in the new planet that you will inhabit, that assuming that this space race will be successful, will still going to be exploitative. That means you will not create any sort of benefit or any sort of marginal benefit when you transfer yourself to this another planet, because like the same tycoons or the same companies that used to transfer you will be the one that is free from taxation, free of check and balance, and probably will be the one that dominates the whole exploitation of resources, because this is the argument to avoid tax. Because billionaire can say like, look, I contributed to the human survival, so I think that as compensation to my service, you should not tax me. But why then government funded programs are relatively better? 3 reasons. First, because they have social contracts with their voters. That means government has much more incentive to be benevolent rather than these companies that probably only want to appease shareholders instead of the whole society. Second of all, government funded programs are funded by taxpayers' money, so most likely they will listen to what taxpayers need and what taxpayers wants the most, right? So, and most likely taxpayers don't want the money to be exploited for something that's not for their greater good. Third of all, they have moral duty for the developing states. Notice that probably NASA or like most space travel technologies are like developed by already developed states, like United States, for example, and they most likely these particular countries have more moral duty to help developing states, like stated in convention, international treaties, and like in the whole international norms. So that means the likelihood for them to make this accessible to the less privileged countries, like Asian countries, for example, are much more bigger rather than these companies. So in conclusion, state-funded space race is comparatively much better. Second of all, why then it's bad for scientific knowledge improvement? Because when you have patent, this will limit information spread for the sake of corporate use. So most likely any research that you find, you will keep it secret and you make this as a tool to enhance your company's profitability instead of sharing it to the whole, like, I don't know, scientists, or to share it to the whole community. That means this transfer of knowledge will never happen. In our side, maybe they can still invest, but we can control the spread of the information to be much more public because government controls it. So by principle, and knowledge should not be withheld, but it's to betterment of civilization, right? That's why in your side of the house, these particular knowledge will be used only for the profit-seeking mind of these particular billionaires, right? So most likely the information will be inaccessible. So at best, you want to have like other developing countries to compete. Probably they will not have the same shared data or the recent discovery. So most likely their progress is going to be significantly slower, or maybe they cannot even catch up to transfer their own citizens to the, I don't know, moon. It's harmful, but practically this